Let's bring on the Mountaineers. Goes around about it to 15, to 10, to 5. A touchdown with Virginia. He did it.
He did it. That's with White. Beaverson. He's gone. Touchdown. Tavon Austin.
As the hills of West Virginia resound with the sounds of Gold and Blue football.
They want to have a 7-on-7 drill. We want to make it a fist fight. Nothing cheap, nothing dirty, but West Virginia football.
From the heart. Straight. It's Mountaineer pride.
Once a Mountaineer, always a Mountaineer.
Leave no doubt tonight. No doubt. They shouldn't have played the old gold blue.
West Virginia is a special place. People of the state that have great pride in this WV logo.
Ain't no stopping the gold and blue.
It is a great night to be a Mountaineer wherever you may be.
And now it's the show brought to you by Mountaineer fans for Mountaineer fans, the Country Roads webcast. What's going on, Mountaineer Nation? Welcome into episode 181 of the CRW podcast here for our Cincinnati preview and predictions episode. And it's hard to believe this is already the final home football game for the 2023 West Virginia football season. But here we are. This season has flown by, just ahead of game 11 now, and we can't wait to get into breaking that game down, talking a little bit about the matchups, providing a key to victory and a score prediction before providing some predictions for the other Big 12's conference games this week. But before we get there, we got to lead this episode off the way we always like to, and that's, of course, with a little bit of Mountaineer news. All right, going to lead off Mountaineer news here on episode 181 with a bit of a update on West Virginia's kickoff time for what will be the final game of the regular season for West Virginia, and that's, of course, coming on the road against Baylor next week on November 25th. And as you can see here, released on social media if you're watching on the video version, for the fourth consecutive week, a 6-day window has been utilized by the Big 12 for West Virginia's football game. So we will learn the kickoff of West Virginia's final game against Baylor either late Saturday night or at some point this coming Sunday. So we will just have to wait a little bit longer to find out what will be the final kickoff time for West Virginia in 2023. And then moving on here in Mountaineer news to things that are more pertinent to this game against Cincinnati, and one of those, of course, is an injury update that we were waiting for Neil Brown to provide on his radio show, and he has since done that, and those are, of course, in regards to the status of C.J. Donaldson and Doug Nestor, two West Virginia starters on offense, of course, the West Virginia running back and right tackle, respectively there. We were concerned about their status for this upcoming game, and it turns out that it sounds like both of them will actually be game time decisions, so we really don't exactly know. But the good thing that we can report on here is that both of them have practiced a little bit. Sounds like Nestor is more of a go than Donaldson is potentially. If nothing else, I think Nestor will be dressed and available, whereas C.J. Donaldson still seems a little bit in question right now, which was kind of what I was expecting if you've been following us here on the CRW when I'm trying to speculate on this thing, because if that was an ankle, like it looks like it could have been for C.J., those things are kind of sometimes tricky to come back from, no matter how minimal of an ankle injury it is or an ankle sprain that it is. And just to go along with that, Neil Brown stated that Donaldson practiced a little on Wednesday and a little bit on Thursday, so progressing well at least. Neil Brown said they're going to let him go through warm-ups and see how he looks, and he'll be a true game-time decision depending on how he performs in warm-ups and how they're judging on how he can cut and things like that, I'm sure. And then in regards to Doug Nestor, Neil Brown actually seemed a little bit more optimistic, as I said there, thinks that he looked a little bit better in the past couple of practices this week than he anticipated. That, of course, coming on his radio show, but also said that Nestor, of course, will be a game-time decision. So both the West Virginia starters' status is still up in the air at this point, but looks like a good sign for Doug Nestor, and we'll just kind of wait and see on C.J. Donaldson there in the West Virginia backfield. As for our injury report this week here on episode 180 of the CRW podcast, as we move through our Mountaineer news segment here. And as we move through Mountaineer news, we now reach probably the most important part of Mountaineer news this week, I would say. And that is, of course, we covered this when it was first announced earlier this season, but now we've reached the time that it's officially happening. Don Nehlen set to be immortalized at Mountaineer Field this coming Saturday. 149 wins at West Virginia, the all-time winningest coach for West Virginia football, as you see there on the graphic if you're tuned in on the video side. And if you are watching on that video side, I want to take a second to say we appreciate you tuning in and watching that way, whether you're watching on the Country Roads webcast channel or on the web there at wvsportsnow.com, where you can also find our show. Do us a favor, hit the like button. Really helps this video's performance and future videos performances as well. And if you're a West Virginia fan and you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button. Helps us and you, as it helps get more of this Mountaineer sports content out to Mountaineer Nation. But we also appreciate you if you listen on the audio side. You can find that on any podcast platform you like: Google, Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, you name it. Just search Country Roads Webcast. And be sure, if you're listening on that side, leave us a rating, review. That helps. And just be sure to share us around with other West Virginia fans that you know. But of course, in regards to Don Nehlen, what can you say that has not been said enough already? Actually, John Antonic put out a great piece over on WVUsports.com, the university's official site there, talking a little bit about Don Nehlen, and I'll read just the first paragraph or two here from you. If you guys want to check out the full article, you should definitely head over there to do it. I mean, Don Nehlen's list of accomplishments here would probably take a long time for me to run down, but the one that I go back to time and time again is the 2 undefeated seasons. Just very impressive there for that to be done at West Virginia, especially when the program was in the state that it was when he first came in here. And I think that it's absolutely poetic justice, and something a lot of people have talked about, and it almost got me emotional the first time that I heard it, was that his first ever win at West Virginia, when they opened the stadium here at Mountaineer Field back in 1980, the team that they played in that game, Cincinnati. And it's just very poetic that, of course, he will be honored against Cincinnati here as well. Kind of comes full circle for Coach Nehlen. Of course, the national championship game appearance, Coach of the Year awards. Not enough great things to say about the greatest coach in West Virginia football history. And just from this article now, it says the word being used is immortalized to describe what West Virginia University is planning to do on Saturday afternoon when it recognizes former coach as the Mountaineers take on the Cincinnati Bearcats at Milan Puskar Stadium. The university is immortalizing Nehlen by placing his name on the diversified energy terrace next to all-time greats Ira Everett Rogers, Sam Huff, Bruce Bosley, Darrell Major Harris, and Chuck Howley. It's Mountaineer football's Mount Rushmore, if you will, and Nehlen's name certainly deserves to be on that list. Just a great piece there. That's just the opening of it there from John Antonic. I encourage you to go read the rest, but wanted to read that first little bit just to kind of describe what they mean when they say Don Nehlen's being immortalized this weekend. It's essentially the same ceremony that a player receives when they retire his jersey, but obviously you can't retire a coach's jersey, so this is kind of the next best thing. And of course, I know a lot of people have talked about a statue maybe for Coach Nehlen. Who knows? Maybe that will come down the line, but at least right now we're going to have his name up honored at the stadium forever. And if you're there in the crowd Saturday, you get to be a part of it, which is a pretty cool thing to get to be a part of. And just shout out to Coach Nehlen. We can't say enough great things about what he did for the West Virginia football program. So certainly wanted to take a second out here to recognize him as we continue throughout Mountaineer news. And then lastly, to wrap up Mountaineer news here, I wanted to take a minute here to acknowledge the West Virginia seniors. Although some of these have the potential to return next season, we know some of these guys will be applying for waivers in the terms of Montre Miller. Keyshawn Cobb still has a redshirt year available, so he'll likely return to the Mountaineers next season as well. But these are the seniors, most of which will be honored in walking Saturday on Senior Day for the Mountaineers. So just wanted to take a second and shout out these names that could be playing their last game ever at Mountaineer Field this Saturday against Cincinnati to wrap up here on Mountaineer news. And of course, it's only fitting to lead it off with one of the team leaders here when we start off this seniors list, and that is Lee Koba. And then we have Jashawn Polk, Keyshawn Cobb, Doug Nestor, Montre Miller, Devin Carter, Beanie Bishop Jr., Malachi Ruffin, Noah Massey, Marcus Floyd, Luke Hamilton, and Devon Hawkins, a.k.a. Day-Day Hawkins, to round out our list of seniors there. Just wanted to take a second and shout out those guys as we prepare for Senior Day and the final Mountaineer home game. Felt it was only right to mention those seniors here as we get set to wrap up our Mountaineer news segment here on episode 181 of the CRW podcast. All right, Mountaineer Nation. So there you have it, an injury update. Of course, wanted to take a second out to honor the seniors there. And then, of course, can't fail to mention Coach Nehlen. He's set to be immortalized forever at Mountaineer Field this coming Saturday. So that will pretty much wrap us up with our Mountaineer news segment. Now let's get into the fun stuff, though, as we get set to break down the matchups against the Cincinnati Bearcats and then come away with our key to victory and, of course, our score prediction here on our Cincinnati preview and predictions episode of the Country Roads webcast. All right, Mountaineer Nation, here we are with our main segment here on episode 181. Get set to dive into our preview and predictions for this matchup against Cincinnati in the 11th game of the 2023 WVU football season, the final home game for the Mountaineers this year. So should be a fun one. We're excited to dive into it. So with no further ado, let's do just that. Of course, this game coming up November 18th, going to take place at 2:30. It's going to be on ESPN Plus if you want to watch it on TV there. Of course, you can catch Tony and the guys on the radio there on the Mountaineer Sports Network as West Virginia comes into the game 6-4 overall and 4-3 in the Big 12 Conference, whereas Cincinnati comes in 3-7 overall, just gaining their first Big 12 Conference win last week to come into this game at 1-6 in the Big 12 Conference. They haven't beaten West Virginia since 2009. The all-time series, of course, 16-3-1 in favor of West Virginia, but this will be their first time meeting as Big 12 opponents, of course, and their first time meeting overall since 2011. Head coach of Cincinnati, of course, Scott Satterfield, in his first season now, coming over from Louisville. He was at Appalachian State before then, where he had a lot of success. ESPN actually likes West Virginia in this one. Looks like a game the Mountaineers are going to be favored in overall. 66% chance to win, according to ESPN's FPI predictor. And then as far as the spread on this game, DraftKings currently at the time of this recording has West Virginia favored by 6.5 points. So there's a little bit of the prologue. Now let's get into the matchups here, starting with the West Virginia offense versus the Cincinnati defense. And when it comes to that Cincinnati defense, they are led by defensive coordinator Brian Brown in his first season, and he has the Bearcats currently ranking 4th in the conference in total defense, giving up 364 yards per game on average. And of course, when you're talking about that Bearcat defense, the one man that you got to lead off that conversation with is the man in the middle, the big nose tackle that's been an absolute force for them this season, and that is, of course, Dante Corleone, 6'2", over 320 pounds. And yes, they call him the Don, they call him the Godfather, whatever reference you want to make to Marlon Brando. Dante Corleone lives up to that name for sure. I think that's a fitting moniker for a player that is impactful as he is. He's been dominant all season, really shutting down opponent rushing attacks almost single-handedly at times, and it's certainly been the strength of this Cincinnati defense, has been the defensive line, and a lot of that credit goes to Corleone. 34 tackles and 3 sacks on this season. Neil Brown has called him the best defensive lineman West Virginia will face all season, and PFF certainly backs that up with his grades: 80 defensive grade, 77 run grade, and a 79 pass rushing grade. So good against both the run and the pass. Zach Frazier versus Dante Corleone is going to be the matchup to watch on Saturday, especially if you're a fan of play in the trenches. Keep your eye on West Virginia center versus the Cincinnati nose tackle, and they're going to be matched up head-to-head. He's a true zero nose tackle, going to be lined up right against Zach Frazier, so that's going to be an interesting matchup there for the Mountaineers in this one, and certainly going to have to try and slow down or at least limit Corleone's production a little bit if possible in this game if West Virginia wants to find success. So that's who starts it up front for Cincinnati. But then when you move back to the next level and you're looking at those linebackers, they have a very solid one there as well, and Daniel Grisiak, who interestingly enough was actually a transfer. West Virginia was after this offseason, but ends up at Cincinnati, came over from Utah State there at the linebacker position and has done a phenomenal job with the Bearcats. Leads the team in sacks with 4, has him top 10 within the Big 12 Conference in that category. He also has great size there at the linebacker position. We're talking about a 250-plus pound linebacker there for them. So this Cincinnati defense, very strong, very powerful, got a lot of guys that will attack you from multiple angles, and Grisiak's one that you'll see involved, of course, when they're trying to shut down West Virginia's run game, which is going to be their primary goal and something they've done a good job of throughout this season, as they've held 3 different opponents to under 100 yards rushing this year. UCF and Oklahoma State are the only teams that's really found sustained success in the run game against this Cincinnati defense. I think that UCF ran for over 200 yards and Oklahoma State ran for over 300. But other than that, they've held most teams under 200. And as I said, there are 3 different teams they've held under 100 yards rushing. So that's certainly been the strength of the Cincinnati defense, has been stopping the run. And we know that's what West Virginia wants to do on offense. So going to be interesting to see how that plays out, whoever has the upper hand in that matchup, whether West Virginia is able to run the football or Cincinnati is able to stop it, could go a long way in determining the fate of this football game. But we still have one more level of the Cincinnati defense to discuss, and that, of course, is the back end. And the player that I want to bring up there to watch is the team leader in tackles for Cincinnati, actually. Coming off a game against Houston, like I said, they secured their first conference win in that game, and also this player secured his first interception of the season, and that is safety Deshaun Pace. He leads the team in tackles with 59 on the year. He's also added 2 sacks to that, and like I said, the interception last week now to add to his stat sheet total, and he's been a stat sheet stuffer for the Cincinnati defense throughout this season and continues to play well, coming back from a suspension earlier in the year, which I believe was for the team's opening Big 12 conference game. And so it's even more impressive to know that he's missed, at least 1 game due to that suspension and still has came back and led the team in tackles, despite the fact playing 1 less game than everybody else. So just shows the kind of impact that he can have and be all over the field. So got to watch out for Deshaun Pace on the Cincinnati defense as well. But if you want to talk about an area where Cincinnati is a bit susceptible, of course, that is through the air, and that is where West Virginia is going to have to make some plays in this game. Hopefully, they're able to find some success in the rushing game against this strong Cincinnati run defense. I think that they will be able to do that, and they will work throughout the game to chip away at that Cincinnati run defense and at least, get a few chunks here and there. But I think West Virginia's play action passing game is going to have to come back into effect in this game and play a big role if West Virginia wants to find success against this Cincinnati defense, because as strong as their rushing defense is, their passing defense has shown the ability to be a little bit leaky when their pass rush doesn't get home. Cincinnati, they're, of course, going to junk up the run game, much like Oklahoma did last week. I think these final 2 opponents will see that film and try and do some similar things, and Cincinnati has the capability to do that with the defensive line that they have. So not only are they going to do that, but they're also going to pressure West Virginia in the passing game. That's what Oklahoma did to Garrett Green, and they saw GG have a game where he struggled. So we're going to need a bounce back for performance from GG, but if he has his head on right and everything, I think that this could be an area where West Virginia has success in the air in this game, is because the fact that Cincinnati, when they don't get home with that pressure that they're bringing, they've shown to be a little bit susceptible on the back end there and give up some plays there from their corners. So West Virginia, I think, has a chance to attack downfield in this game if they can, maybe establish the run at least enough to get Cincinnati to bite on the play action, have those guys attacking downhill. We know this is an aggressive Cincinnati defense, so maybe West Virginia can make that come back to bite them a little bit with the usage of their play action pass in this game. So I think that's West Virginia's best plan of attack against this Cincinnati defense. But looking at this matchup, West Virginia's offense versus Cincinnati defense, who has the edge here? It's a wash for me. I can't pick either side because I think in the run game, it's a toss-up. You might even lean more to Cincinnati with how West Virginia was dominated up front last week, and we know Cincinnati's defensive line is very strong. But then when you look at the passing game, I think West Virginia may have an advantage there. So it's a bit of a wash for me on this side. So that means let's flip it over to the other side and talk about that matchup a little bit and see if either team has an advantage on that side of the football. Flipping it over to the other side and talking about the West Virginia defense against this Cincinnati offense a little bit. Of course, the Cincinnati offense will be coordinated by Brad Glenn in his first year, who we actually saw last year. He was the passing game coordinator for Virginia Tech, so not the first time West Virginia has faced him as an assistant coach, although it's to be determined how big of a role he has, probably more so in game planning, because much like West Virginia, the Cincinnati head coach Scott Satterfield is the play caller for the Bearcat offense as well. But the offense has been good on the ground, and these are 2 teams that are almost like looking in a mirror when it comes to how they attack opposing defenses. As stop me if this sounds familiar and you've heard this before, Cincinnati on offense, they want to run the football and control time of possession. Sound like a team that we know, Mountaineer fans? Of course it does. And one reason they've been able to do that this season is because they've been strong in that run game, of course, and that is led by running back Corey Kiner, 7th in the Big 12 in rushing with 885 yards. And he's a really tough guy to tackle, 5'9", 215 pounds. And if you need evidence of that, look no further than this statistic, as he is tied for first in the Big 12 conference with 3 runs this season, longer than 50-plus yards. So he's a running back that can obviously hurt you in between the tackles, give you that 3 yards in a cloud of dust, but also he may catch you off guard and hit an explosive run every now and again, as well, as evidenced by that statistic. And that's one of the reasons that we're talking about a top 5 rushing offense in the nation here with this Cincinnati team. And of course, I talked about them in West Virginia being very similar. West Virginia right there behind them, 7th in the nation in rushing. Cincinnati averaging 223 rushing yards per game. West Virginia averaging 214. And the most impressive stat I saw in regards to the Cincinnati run game is probably the fact that they've ran for over 200 yards in 8 out of the 10 games that they've played this season. That's tough to do. So got to tip your cap to them and their rushing offense. They know how to get it done if they're getting it done that frequently. So West Virginia going to have their work cut out for them against this Cincinnati rushing attack. And of course, Corey Kiner isn't the only running back to worry about for the Bearcats. You also have to worry about running back Miles Montgomery. He's a speedster, 6.6 yards per carry, has 2 100-plus yard games of his own, and is actually one of the highest running backs graded on PFF, over an 84 grade there. So yes, he's only the backup, but when he gets in there, he has fresh legs and is one of the faster players on their football team. So he can really make some things happen as well. And then you can't discount the quarterback being involved in the running game there. And when we're talking about the Cincinnati quarterback, we're talking about Emory Jones, transferred in from Florida. And I would argue that's actually the strongest aspect of his game is his ability to run the football. Sometimes he leaves a little bit to be desired in the passing game, but he certainly can be a weapon in the running attack, as he has 455 yards on this season and has ran 4-3 touchdowns. So definitely a matchup to be concerned about. There is this Cincinnati rushing offense, but the silver lining there for West Virginia is I think if they can find a way to slow down that Cincinnati rushing attack and try and make them one-dimensional and force them to throw the football, I think that could be advantage West Virginia, because Cincinnati has been nothing to write home about with their passing attack this year, so much so to the point that the aforementioned Emory Jones that I just talked about has actually now been involved in a 2-quarterback system the past couple of weeks as they try and find a little bit of a spark in that pass game that they really need. Emory Jones, like I said, left a lot to be desired this year. 15 passing touchdowns versus 10 interceptions, so not the best performance. He has a tendency to put the ball in harm's way, and his accuracy can come into question at times as well, especially if you can get home with some pressure, which I think West Virginia will certainly try and do in this game. But he's not the only quarterback West Virginia will see. As I said there, the past couple of games, they've started playing another quarterback at least 2 series in the game or so, it looks like, and that's sophomore quarterback Brady Lichtenberg. So West Virginia likely to face 2 quarterbacks in this contest when Cincinnati goes to the air. But when they do decide to go to the air, there are 2 receivers really West Virginia needs to hone in on, because those are the main guys that Cincinnati targets, as wide receiver Xavier Henderson leads the team in receptions with 48 and leads the team in yards with 648, whereas Braden Smith leads the team in receiving touchdowns with 4. Both of those guys each have over 500 yards receiving, as Braden Smith has 538, but no other receiver on the Cincinnati roster has more than 221 receiving yards. So certainly those are the guys to key on in the Cincinnati passing game, Henderson and Smith, with either Lichtenberg and Jones triggering. But the main thing here is West Virginia has to stop that Cincinnati rushing attack. Corey Kiner and those Montgomery guys in the backfield. And I think, though, that West Virginia has a good chance to be able to do that. And that's just due to the fact that we've seen West Virginia play strong rushing teams throughout this season. I mean, you can go back to the very first game of the year. Penn State's rushing attack was very vaunted coming into the season with Nick Singletary and Katron Allen. So West Virginia's strategy in that game didn't pay off for them in that contest was, okay, we're going to stop the run and we're going to force their quarterback to beat us. Now, Drew Allar was very talented when he was able to do that. If West Virginia is able to replicate that game plan in this contest, I don't see Emory Jones and Brady Lichtenberg being able to defeat the Mountaineers. So really, it's just a major key in this game for West Virginia to stop this Cincinnati rushing attack when you're talking about the West Virginia defense. But I think that they'll be able to do that. So I'm giving the advantage to the Mountaineers when we're talking about the terms of this matchup. And then lastly, want to discuss the intangible special teams a little bit here. From what I understand, Cincinnati struggled a bit on special teams this year, and that could be an area where West Virginia is able to find another advantage there. I know it's been a bit of a mixed bag for the Mountaineers at times this season, but I think overall it's been a net positive. Oliver Straw's been very good in the punting game. You've been very good with your field goal kicking for the most part. I know it's return coverage in the return game where things have left a little bit to be desired, but I think overall West Virginia's special teams has not been a negative for this squad. So I would give West Virginia an advantage there as well. So if you're counting there, that's 1 wash and 2 advantages for the Mountaineers. So it seems like they've got a good chance to win this, but in order to do that, they're going to have to find a way to execute on some major keys. And what is my major key to that victory? Let's talk about that now as we get to my favorite portion always of these preview and prediction shows here on the CRW podcast, and that is it's time for key to victory and score predictions here for Game 11 of the 2023 WVU football season. All right, getting into my key to victory here in this matchup for the Mountaineers. Obviously, I talked about stopping the Cincinnati rushing attack is one major thing West Virginia is going to need to do in this football game. Probably going to have to try and find a little bit of success in the run game if they're able to do that. Of course, winning the turnover battle would go a long way, but I think that kind of plays right into what I'm talking about here, because my key to victory in this one, when it's two teams that are so similar as it seems to be in this matchup, both teams try to, dominate on the ground and attempt to possess the football more than their opponent. Both teams have done a pretty good job at that this season and are kind of similar there. But when you look at it, you wonder, why is West Virginia 6-4 and Cincinnati 3-7 then? Well, here's the main reason in my eyes, and it's playing smart football, being disciplined. I think West Virginia has done a much better job of that this season. You look at Cincinnati, they're near the bottom of the conference in plus-minus turnover margin. They've been a heavily penalized team at times, and West Virginia's kind of been the inverse of that. So that goes right into my key to victory here. I think the key for the Mountaineers to come out with a victory in their final home game here is to play smart football. Don't beat yourself. That means, go back to the way you've been playing for the majority of this season. Keep your penalty total, 5 or less, which is something West Virginia has done a great job of in almost every game this season. And, of course, you cannot turn the football over, and you got to force Cincinnati to do just that and let them beat themselves. You just play smart football, play your game, and I think you're the better team here. And if you don't make those crazy mistakes and don't come out of this one as the more penalized team or lose the turnover margin by a large discrepancy, then I think West Virginia will find a way to win this football game. So my key to victory in this one is eliminating mental mistakes, playing smart football, and just don't beat yourself in this contest. Now, do I think West Virginia will be able to do that? Final home game of the season. I mentioned in Mountaineer news there, obviously they're honoring Coach Nehlen. So that alone should create great atmosphere there within the stadium. That should give the Mountaineers another check mark in their corner there that could boost them here in this game. I also wanted to point out the fact that I think Neil Brown, he's done a good job throughout this season pointing out little facts to motivate this team. I think he's got a little thing that could potentially motivate himself in this game, and that's just his record versus the Cincinnati coach, Scott Satterfield. They played 3 times when Neil was at Troy and Scott Satterfield was at Appalachian State, and Satterfield is currently 3-0 against Neil Brown. So Neil Brown should be motivated to get his first win over Scott Satterfield in this one as well. You add in the fact that it's senior day, of course, like I said, honoring Coach Nehlen. Hopefully Neil Brown's motivated by that. And, of course, the team wanted to go out on a positive note the last time in front of the fans. I think all of these are working in West Virginia's favor. Plus, I think they'll be able to execute on some of the keys that I talked about throughout this game. And I think West Virginia does win this game, and I think they cover the current spread of 6.5. I've got West Virginia winning this one. I think it'll be a little bit more slow-paced, maybe a bit more lower scoring than we've seen in recent weeks. But either way, I've got West Virginia winning this one by 10 points over the Bearcats, as my prediction for this game will be West Virginia 27, Cincinnati 17. So there you have it, Mountaineer Nation, a bit of a breakdown of the matchup against the Bearcats, complete with a score prediction there to close it out. But there are other games to predict around the conference yet again this week, and some good ones here in Week 12 of the Big 12 season. So let's talk about some of these other conference games and make some picks for those as we close out episode 181 of the CRW podcast with our final segment as we get set to take a look around the Big 12. All right, around the Big 12 here on our Cincinnati preview and predictions episode. Good slate of games this week, all happening on Saturday, and I think there were a couple different picks I could have made for the game of the week this week, but I'm interested to see the Kansas rivalry with, conference title implications even potentially involved in that one. So that's going to be our game of the week here. So that'll be our final game that we pick here to wrap up our Around the Big 12 segment. But let's lead it off in chronological order other than that, starting with the noon contest. Oklahoma hitting the road to head out to Provo to play BYU. That one's going to be televised on ESPN. Obviously, I think Oklahoma played maybe their best game of the season against West Virginia, unfortunately, last week, but for the Sooners, that potentially means that they're really hitting their stride here at the end of the season, and that's bad news for a BYU team that's really in a bad spot right now, dealing with some injuries and some other things, trying to adjust to this new conference. When you get to this point in the season, that's when kind of the lack of depth that you need to build up to be able to compete within this conference can hit you. So you're seeing that happen with BYU, plus some injuries involved. I think Oklahoma wins this one and wins it going away. You're talking probably 3 or more score win by Oklahoma in that contest. Of course, we talked about the Mountaineers and Bearcats playing at 2:30 on ESPN Plus there in the final home game for West Virginia. Then we get a rivalry game between Baylor and TCU here as well at 3:30. This one's on ESPN Plus also. I think that TCU will handle the Baylor Bears this year, but watch out for this one to potentially be close. I know Baylor's really struggling this season, but you never know what can happen with this game. It could end up coming down to the wire still yet, but TCU should have more than enough to get the advantage, and I got them getting the wins over the Baylor Bears in this contest, which then brings us to our 4 o'clock game televised on ESPN2, and that's Oklahoma State heading down to Houston to take on the Fighting Dana Holgersons there. And, 2 weeks ago, I would have thought Oklahoma State would dominate this game, would probably win easily. But now I'm looking at it and I'm wondering a little bit about it, because you looked at Oklahoma State last week heading into UCF, getting absolutely dominated. Did they put something on tape that Houston can replicate? Also, I'm thinking about when West Virginia played Houston. Surprisingly, Houston did a good job stuffing the West Virginia running game. If Houston's able to do that against Oklahoma State, they could surprise some people in that game as well. I'm by no means picking a Houston victory here. Personally, I think Oklahoma State's going to come out ready to bounce back. They know they still got a good chance to get into the conference title game potentially. So I think we'll see a bounce back performance from Ollie Gordon and Oklahoma State. I think they'll go on the road and beat Houston, but you never know what could happen. It's always interesting to see how a team bounces back from a surprising upset loss like that. It can go one of 2 ways, but I'm expecting the Cowboys to bounce back on the positive side of that and get the win here over Houston in that 4 o'clock game. Then our next contest, UCF, of course, a team that we're talking about that just beat Oklahoma State pretty handily, hits the road to take on Texas Tech at 5 o'clock. This game will be televised on Fox Sports 2. And I think this is interesting because both of these teams are coming off of big wins that a lot of people probably did not expect them to gain last week. Texas Tech upsetting Kansas, and of course, as I mentioned, UCF upsetting Oklahoma State. So both of these teams probably riding high and in a good place, mentally coming into this game. Should make for a fun contest to watch. And, I really like UCF's offense. I think they're a different team with John Rice Plumlee at the helm. I think that they can certainly score enough points to come out and win this football game. I almost want to pick them to do so, but just something in my gut just tells me that making that first trip to Lubbock, I think, is going to be a little bit interesting for UCF. They may not know exactly what it's going to be like, right? Lubbock's an interesting place. That's a tough place to play in, especially when you've never been there and you're not used to it. It can really throw you for a loop. I'm thinking back to, the first time West Virginia went there in 2012, we were riding high off a big win over the Longhorns, top 5 in the country, thought we were on our way to a very special season, and then go there in Lubbock. Those Texas wins, all that was talked about after that game and how different the wind is in Lubbock, and West Virginia just got absolutely housed in that contest. So, I think that UCF will make this a game. I think it'll be interesting, but I'm going to go with Texas Tech in this one just because of that home field advantage, and maybe they catch UCF off guard with a little bit. I'm going to ride the Red Raiders there in that game, which then brings us to our nightcap in the conference, which I nearly made the game of the week this week and easily could have been. It was a toss-up between these final 2 games, but I decided to go with the other one. So we'll talk about Texas and Iowa State first. That's coming up at 8 o'clock p.m. on Fox. Texas heading to Ames. Tough place to play there, and I think that, that place is going to be absolutely rocking as Iowa State looks to, secure a victory over Texas, and they could really absolutely muddle this conference championship race, get all these tiebreaker scenarios, everyone looking at them with a fine-tooth comb. If Iowa State's able to pull off this victory over Texas, I think, playing in Ames at night, they will certainly probably make a game of it, but I think the Longhorns just have too much talent. They're a really good team this year. They're good on both sides of the football. They have Quinn Ewers back on offense. I think Texas will just be a little bit too much to handle for the Cyclones at the end of the night, so I'm going to ride the Longhorns to get the win in that one, which then brings us to our game of the week here in our Around the Big 12 segment on episode 181 here of the CRW podcast, which I appreciate you guys tuning into this one, whether you're listening or viewing it like I said, if you're viewing it, hit the like button. Be sure and subscribe to us. If you're listening to it, leave us a rating and review. That helps. And just share us around with other Mountaineer fans. You may know we really appreciate that here at the Country Roads webcast. But getting into this game of the week, of course, obviously you got the rivalry there. Kansas State versus Kansas. It's in Lawrence this week, 7 o'clock kick on FS1. It's going to be interesting to see how this one shakes out with the status of Jason Bean up in the air at the quarterback position. But Ballard did not play bad for the Jayhawks when he was in the football game. So maybe Kansas will find a way to keep this competitive either way. But I think Kansas State right now is playing some really good football. Seems like they finally found their way. I don't know if it was a wake-up call to Will Howard a few weeks ago when they started playing Avery Johnson at the quarterback position, but seems like he's really been playing better football since then, and their offense as a whole has really, come together, I think, and that's a good thing because we know Kansas behind Lance Leipold, they get really creative on offense, and they're going to find a way to pick up yards and probably score some points in this game, so it's going to be interesting. I think you could go either way in this football game. I went back and forth a little bit myself. Kansas is playing at home, so that crowd could potentially be an advantage for the Jayhawks, but I think I like the Wildcats right now. I think that they're playing good football. I think they're a bit more experienced. I think, of course, you got Will Howard, who's, whether it's Bean or Ballard at quarterback for Kansas, Will Howard obviously has the advantage there. They've played in bigger football games, obviously winning the Big 12, title game last season. So I think that leads me to believe Kansas State's just a bit more battle-tested, and I think they'll find a way to win our Big 12 game of the week this week. So I'm going with Kansas State to defeat Kansas to wrap up our Around the Big 12 segment on episode 181 of the CRW podcast. All right, Mountaineer Nation. So that will pretty much get ready to wrap us up here for our Cincinnati preview and predictions episode of the Country Roads webcast. Really appreciate you guys tuning into this one, whether you viewed it or you listened to it. Of course, we went through some Mountaineer news topics there, broke down the matchups, provided our key to victory and score prediction for the Mountaineers, as well as some predictions for the other Big 12 conference games. But would love to hear your prediction, whether it's for the West Virginia game or any of these other Big 12 games within the slate. Be sure to drop your thoughts on them down in the comments below. We really appreciate those interactions as we continue to try and grow the Country Roads webcast community throughout Mountaineer Nation. And you can come check back with us immediately following the game as we host the West Virginia postgame show over on the Voice of College Football YouTube channel and the Big 12 Voice of College Football YouTube channel. But if you don't have a chance to tune into that live immediately following the conclusion of this game against Cincinnati on Saturday, that's okay. We'll be back within the next couple of days after that with our Cincinnati Review and Reactions podcast episode here on the CRW. And you can find out when that episode will be released by following us on social media. We're on X at WVU Country Roads, and then we're just Country Roads Webcast on Facebook and Instagram. Really appreciate you guys as always. Hoping for a positive end to the home slate for the Mountaineers, and I think they've got a good chance to end this home slate in a positive manner for us fans here watching this football game on Saturday. We're looking forward to it. Know all of you all are also, and we'll be excited to talk about it with you guys following up there as well. Having said that, as always, I'm Jordan Cruz, and until next time, let's go
If you
Mountaineers.
really want to know, then come on, let's go. Take a stroll down those